What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Garage Geopolitics. My name is Matt Livers. We have a VIP guest this afternoon, John Kemp. We're going to be talking about a couple different things. American Samoa in the news, how to hide an empire. There's a logo map we're going to talk about and reference some of the stuff that's in that book. And then why should you care about this? Why are you spending a couple minutes out of your day to learn a little bit more about geopolitics in this garage? So Mr. Kemp and I both work within the educational area, and so we would like to have our watchers, viewers, recognize that we are both white men in the middle of Minnesota talking about something that is taking place all the way over there in American Samoa, or Samoa, closer to New Zealand than to anything else. So we just want to put that disclaimer out there that we're just having fun with this conversation, want people to be interested. So, first off with this, we have some court cases, and so John brought this idea up to me, and we were talking about how people from American countries aren't really fully represented as American citizens. So, John, what did you want to share about this court case that you just heard about?
Oh yeah, with my really tertiary research here, but this idea kind of came up in our conversation around the book, and just the idea that what parts of America really extend beyond the borders that we're kind of used to thinking of. And so just recently, I think it was October, the most recent case, and the other one was about 10, 11 years ago. But two cases brought up by ethnically American Samoan plaintiffs, both suing essentially for the same thing, to extend the birthright citizenship that at least I enjoy, and most other Americans enjoy, to the people of American Samoa as well, because they are actually the only major territory of the United States that actually does not apply to. This applies in all the other territories except for American Samoa, which I think Matt's going to get to maybe a little bit more of the why behind a bit later. But the first one in 2012 argued that the 14th Amendment should extend to them, and that's what gives us our birthright citizenship. The second one actually goes back to this thing called the insular cases, which are from the early 1900s.
It's a fun word, insular case.
Insular, yeah, you know what it refers to?
Kind of. So cases that are kind of taken out of context and then just put it. No, okay, enlighten me.
They're all about islands.
Islands.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
But I thought it was the first one too, and then I just learned that an hour and a half ago.
Learning something new. There we go.
I don't look dumb, but you do.
Thanks, John.
But we had the second one goes after those cases specifically, which would establish kind of the Supreme Court precedent for not extending birthright citizenship to these people. There's a better way to say that sentence, but we're gonna roll with it. So neither of them actually officially got heard by the Supreme Court, but both of them were appealed to it because they were suing the federal government. The last one I think actually got the closest, but it really boils down to a bit of an understanding of the different branches of government too, because the Supreme Court has to ultimately go off the Constitution, but there are certain things that Congress is also allowed to interpret and do, and so they're leaning on that at times as well. And so because Congress has labeled these, or labeled specifically American Samoa as unincorporated, the court has been able to kind of wash its hands of this a little bit, although interestingly enough, not in these cases, but there's another one heard last year in Gorsuch, of all people, kind of basically called out the insular case and was like, we need a case to look back at these, even though SCOTUS denied this one. But this has been kind of brought up in the last decade at least twice now, so some of that's kind of curious and got me thinking, where does our citizenship come from, and why do some people get it and not others?
Well, and I think, and we'll get to it with the American Psyche stuff here later, but as far as acknowledging people as Samoan being part of America, like having that citizenship, but we just don't think about that very much. So, moving on to our second topic, How to Hide an Empire is the book that we were just referring to with as far as the exclusion of the American Psyche or a part of the American citizenship. So John and I have both read this book. It's a fantastic book. There's this idea of America as this logo map, and I had a little transportation map here for you, so those will also have fun. So we look at this and we're like, yeah, there's America. Yep, that's America. But in the reality, it's like, well, where's Alaska? Where's Puerto Rico? Where's Hawaii? Where's America Samoa? All these other colonies, and I left former colonies. I left some out. Sorry, I can't list all of them off the top of my head. Guam, can't forget about Guam. But they're not on this map, and this is America as a whole, but we forget about these other places that don't necessarily bump up right next to us, so we don't think about them as part of our country. I'm going to try to go back here. There it is. So with that, Daniel Immerward does a fantastic job of storytelling throughout the book, as well as bringing to light these very specific details in American history or world history that has kind of brought the U.S. to these areas, allowed them to take over those areas, and how we've been able to exploit and kind of use them in the past. And then now we're in this transition area of like, well, what should we do moving forward as a whole, country of American Samoa, Puerto Rico, and the United States? Thoughts on the book, John? Anything for that?
I think you summarized it pretty well. I think another thing that really hit me that we never maybe chatted about too much was by the time you get about 3/4 of the way through, you realize you're hearing a lot of the same names over and over again. You start realizing that American imperialism boiled down to like 6 dudes over the course of like 40 years. But the connection that got me thinking about the American Samoan cases, or even just made me aware of them in the first place, goes back to even pre-insular cases in the Guano Islands. When we were taking over those in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, not the 19s, but the 18s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. I think at our peak we had almost 200 of them. But there was a murder case that stemmed from one of those islands after there was a worker revolt, and they killed 3 of the overseers. And there's certainly a racial component to this too, because all the workers were people of color, and all the overseers, foremen, were white. But the case boiled down to, could this guy be tried for murder if the territory that he killed somebody on, even if he killed an American citizen, wasn't technically American territory, or wasn't officially American soil? And the court ultimately recognized it as such. There was an act called the Guano Islands Act from the 1850s or 60s, although eventually his death sentence got commuted into a lifetime prison sentence. But,
and also a quick reference,
sparked that.
Why do we care about guano? It's fantastic for agricultural practices back in the day, rich in nitrogen, and help those plants grow really quickly. So both recommend the book, fantastic book, and that's where we got kind of the idea to talk about American Samoa and American relations. So kind of the last thing, again, I try to bring all these little episodes and interviews with, well, why should we care? Why am I wasting my time thinking about this? So a couple points about this is that we have a country that we kind of acknowledge as part of the U.S., but not really. They're over 6,200 miles away. Now that's a huge distance. That's a completely different part of the world, completely different culture and history, and we're still not allowing them to have political representation in our government. They can come in and ask various representatives to help them out for their cases, but when do they get to be a part of our country? How are we moving forward with this? That's kind of something that the American psyche needs to figure out. Do we need to acknowledge the needs of America Samoa moving forward, or do we need to distance ourselves from them and give them more freedom and autonomy from the U.S.? How can we control an area but not represent them of their rights? That sounds kind of revolutionary background again, of like, hey, let's control this area but not give them any political representation. So kind of thinking about that going back in history. And then the idea of this country never really wanted to be a part of, or excuse me, this part of the U.S. never really wanted to be a part of the U.S., so why can't we give them back their freedom? John, any closing thoughts or anything like that?
I think you touched on a lot of the big ones, and you got the trickiness of, if it's the case that American Samoa wants to be fully independent and distinct from the United States, to what degree does our presence, occupation, relationship, however you want to define it, over the last 120-ish years, make that maybe difficult to really extricate or remove yourself?
Yep.
Not that that's necessarily a great excuse, but still certainly a factor if that were to be the case. Again, I did most of my research just on these court cases, but yeah, I mean, getting back to the idea of the book too, and I think at the heart of How to Hide an Empire is that conflict between our in the moment interests, right? These Guano Islands that Livers was talking about here, where we want to go after these natural resources, but then how does that conflict with our national myth, right? And our identity, this idea of freedom and democracy and self-representation. Yeah.
We don't really think about a whole lot of colonies that the U.S. used to control, so it's kind of
my students lean back when I bring this idea up to them a little bit.
It's a weird thing. So if you like what you heard today, feel free to give me a thumbs up, comment on any questions or mispronunciations of things that we had. If you really want to get crazy, hit the subscribe button. Have a good afternoon. See you next time.